This morning on the Ag Issues program, a pleasure, as always, to bring on to the program Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us in studio this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Let's get right into it. And amazingly enough, healthcare and anything associated with healthcare has been kind of sitting in the background with tariffs and everything else that have been taking place. But there has been a lot that has been going on, and this is regards to Medicare and its relation to health savings accounts, health care sharing arrangements, but also having to do with an executive order that President Trump signed here this past weekend.
Well, I think he's going to sign it today. I think the news just broke. In fact, I didn't see it until after I had published my article that we're going to talk about here yesterday afternoon. I didn't see it until early this morning. And it's something that he tried in his first administration, and then the Biden administration revoked his executive order. And what he's trying to do here is lower pharmaceutical drug prices. And but he's going to do this by granting what's called most favored nation status with respect to pharmaceutical prices in the U.S. to get those drug prices down. Now, how does that work? It's kind of complex, and there are some economic factors that will run against it. It's going to be difficult to accomplish the goal, but it's, I think, a worthy attempt to try. But what it starts out with is benchmarking against lower international prices. So many other developed nations have government-negotiated or regulated drug prices, which are often then significantly lower than those in the U.S. So by tying U.S. prices to those lower international benchmarks, the amount the U.S. government pays for drugs could decrease substantially. That would be step one. And then the second step would be to reduce the subsidy to other nations. So with most favored nation status, we are paying higher prices here in the United States, which effectively subsidizes pharmaceutical innovation, and it lowers drug costs in other countries. So by implementing most favored nation status, that could reduce that disparity. The third prong of this is that because the U.S. is one of the largest pharmaceutical markets, once we adopt a most favorable nation policy, it could potentially, and I say potentially here, exert more pressure on pharmaceutical companies to drop their prices to match those in other wealthy nations to maintain access to the U.S. market. All of this with an eye toward getting potential and significant savings to consumers in this country. So it could lead to billions of dollars of savings for U.S. taxpayers and patients over several years. But there are some things that could cut against it. There will be pharmaceutical industry opposition. They have argued for a long time that this type of policy will restrict innovation and development, their research and development. Now, with that, I would say if Congress can pass the tax bill, there's a provision in the tax bill that would front-load R&D expenses, meaning you could deduct those right up front in the year that you incur them. The current law requires a business to amortize those costs over time. So that would go a long way toward negating what the pharmaceutical companies argue with respect to decreasing their incentive to invest in research and development. There could be a potential for drug shortages, plus pharmaceutical companies in other countries could potentially find ways to game the system. They could circumvent the most favored nation rules through confidential rebates and just simply not being transparent, which has been a problem. And then, of course, we always have the issue with how do we define comparable countries? Who do we benchmark against? That's going to be a problem. And how do you account for differences in healthcare systems? But it's a worthy try. We'll see how it goes. And I think when you combine this with RFK Jr. on the other side, focusing on cleaning up the food that we consume, which then in turn is part and parcel that leads to the increased use of pharmaceuticals. You've got two powerful things going on here. I hope it works, and I think it's worth a shot.
And this is something that's not new in the aspect that President Trump signed a similar executive order in his first term?
Yes, he did, and it was reversed by the Biden administration.
And, so much of this is with regards to health savings accounts, health care sharing arrangements as well. This is something like you said, this is not going to be short term. This is going to be a little longer term as to where this is going to go. But in this case as well, make sure to talk with your financial or retirement planner to look at the rules to make sure everything is what you need, and depending on how this goes, obviously, too, it sounds like.
Well, there are a couple of other things here. You mentioned health share arrangements and health savings accounts. I try to mention to all of my students, of course, I'm dealing with younger people, generally very healthy people, that one of the best things they can get into to minimize health costs, and they're going to figure this out pretty soon, how expensive this can be. And this is also, I think, real good advice for sole proprietorship, small businesses. And I've talked a lot over the years to farm and ranch operations, and most of those are sole proprietorship operations. Then one of the things you can get into, there are actually a couple of things, but the first one here is a health savings account. And that has a triple tax benefit to it. You can deduct your contributions to your health savings account, and it's like an IRA. But the tax rules are that your account earnings grow tax free, and then when you withdraw money out to pay qualified medical expenses, that's not included in income. So you get a triple tax benefit there. For family coverage this year, you can contribute $8,550 to the account. So if it's self-only coverage, it's $4,300. You've got to have it backstopped by a high-deductible health plan that has at least a $3,300 deductible for family coverage, or $1,650 for self-only coverage. But one of the complications, Greg, when you get into this, as you get older, if you become eligible and enrolled in Medicare, you can't contribute anymore to an HSA. But just being eligible for Medicare doesn't prevent additional contributions. You can contribute past age 65 if you're delaying enrolling in Medicare. And if your spouse enrolls in Medicare, you can still contribute to your own account if you aren't also enrolled. So that's an important point. But even after you do enroll in Medicare, you can still withdraw the funds from your HSA tax-free to pay for qualified medical expenses, and you can use the funds in the account to pay for various Medicare-related expenses, such as premium, deductibles, co-pays, and co-insurance. But once you reach age 65, you can pull money out of your HSA for any reason without incurring a tax penalty. It's just that those withdrawals are taxable. When it comes to a health care sharing arrangement, now these are different, and I find that fewer people are even aware of what a health care sharing ministry is. These are organizations where members with common beliefs share medical costs, and so you're contributing a monthly amount, and those funds help pay for other members' eligible medical expenses. One of the benefits of a health care sharing ministry is you're pooled together basically with other healthy people, which means your annual contribution each month is going to be significantly lower than if you're trying to go the conventional health insurance route. It's a good way to reduce cost of what otherwise would be paid for by health insurance. And, of course, Medicare comes into play here. And if you have Medicare and you're in a health care sharing ministry, the health care sharing ministry doesn't necessarily coordinate benefits with Medicare in the same way that traditional insurance plans do. So if you have Medicare, Medicare is going to pay for Medicare-covered services first, and the health share ministry might help with some of the out-of-pocket costs that Medicare doesn't cover. But it really depends on the specific rules of your particular health care sharing ministry, and you have to check that out. They may have restrictions on what they cover, such as pre-existing conditions, but Medicare can be more comprehensive and guaranteed coverage. So you can have both, but they operate independently. So health savings accounts, health care sharing ministries, another way for sole proprietorship, farming, ranching operations, small businesses, and generally younger and healthier people. It's a good way to manage those health costs pretty effectively.
A couple of things on that. I'm assuming you're probably anticipating the pharmaceutical companies to have as much of a pushback on this as they did the first time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they'll fight it back. But this time, they would be swimming a little bit upstream on this, or paddling upstream, I should say, because of the provision that's going to be in the tax reconciliation bill that will allow them to get an immediate deduction for research and development expenses. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. And this is going to be a big week this week, Greg, for the tax bill. It's going to be debated in the House. They are still pushing for a Memorial Day passage in the House and then debate in the Senate during June and to the president's desk by July 4. So this is the week. The go button is on this morning.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, is joining us. And Roger, first thing we're going to talk about, and if you have been following the case of the Maud family in South Dakota, there was some major news early last week concerning the Maud family, but this also has to do with in this whole thing resolving land disputes with the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah, that's right, Greg. We had a great break in that case, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I had gotten the news a few days earlier, but it hadn't been public yet that the USDA was going to drop the criminal charges against the Mauds. For those listening that aren't familiar with the case, this is a fifth-generation farming operation in South Dakota, kind of east of Custer State Park and the federal land that's there surrounding Custer State Park and the Badlands. So they're kind of squeezed in between there, but they've been farming there since the very early 1900s, and Charles's family has. And about 70 to 80 years ago, there was a fence that was put in by the Forest Service, demarcating the line between the government's land and the private land that the Mauds farm. Well, there was a resurvey that was done a couple of years ago, and the government determined that the Mauds were actually farming over on federal land. And so instead of trying to work things out, they filed a criminal case individually against Charles and individually against Heather, asserting that they had each stolen government property. And that charge would have carried a 10-year prison sentence with it. So these are people that were just simply minding their own business, farming and moving their irrigation equipment around. And they have small children, and the children were terrified, of course, by all of this. Well, the word got to, a couple of weeks ago, the word got to President Trump a little bit over 2 weeks ago, and Secretary Rollins and a member of the Interior Department and Undersecretary had a meeting, and the President directed the Ag Secretary to drop the criminal case. So where this puts this now is back to where it was before the criminal case was filed, and that's trying to figure out how to resolve this matter. Now, I wrote a piece a week or so ago, just over a week ago on my blog, pointing out that there is a provision in federal law, and it was amended by the 2018 Farm Bill, so it's still sitting there in the Farm Bill. It's called the Small Tracts Act, and that allows the Secretary of Agriculture, at the Secretary's discretion, to enter into negotiations and ultimately an agreement with the landowners where that land in controversy, if it's lost its Forest Service character and it's kind of a remote piece, and what they can do in that situation is come up with a price at which the livestock owner, the rancher, the farmer, whatever the case might be, in this situation it would be the Mauds, could acquire that disputed tract, and they would actually have clear title to that land. There's a special way the funds are handled. There's a special fund that's created to help the USDA do this in a favorable way for those landowners. So we'll see if they use the Small Tracts Act to solve this. And
this was modified, or as far as the law is, in the 2018 Farm Bill, which unfortunately still is the current law right now.
Yeah, the 2018, the 2024, the 2025 Farm Bill. Yeah, that's right. But you're right, Greg. The 2018 Farm Bill did increase the amount of land that could possibly be conveyed under the Small Tracts Act from 10 acres to 40 acres. It was Steve King, a representative out of western Iowa, that was instrumental in pushing that through and getting that increase. And the 2018 Farm Bill also specifically addresses encroachments by allowing the conveyance of smaller tracts, parcels of 10 acres or less, where you have permanent habitable improvements that have been made, and there's no evidence that the encroachment was intentional or negligent. In other words, I've got irrigation equipment on this land now. I put a pump there from our irrigation well. Those types of things. I put a barn up or some other type of structure. So you can use that aspect of the Small Tracts Act to resolve this dispute too.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just resolving the boundary issues and encroachments, because so much of that is what the Mods controversy was, the Mod family controversy was throughout all this entire ordeal that they had.
Yeah, that's right. And some people may be scratching their head saying, well, isn't there already a procedure in the law if I have an issue with my neighbor and we've got a line that's not, turns out is not on the surveyed line, but we've been farming to that point for decades and there's an old fence that's there. Isn't that the boundary? Well, yeah, it is. The problem in the Mod situation is that your neighbor on the other side of the fence is the big bad federal government. Mm-hmm. And so that rule doesn't apply when the federal government's on the other side of the fence. You can't assert boundary by acquiescence or adverse possession against the federal government. That's what the Small Tracts Act is trying to do a workaround on.
And correct me if I'm wrong, this case has gone 10 years?
No, it hasn't gone that long.
Okay.
It's gone, I think the resurvey was done in 21 or 2, and then it elevated to a criminal case in 24, I believe it was.
But it was to the point that they knew what was what could be facing them as far as jail time is concerned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were set for trial. It was pushing close to trial. Trial had been scheduled, it got pushed back, but they were to that point where this was not getting resolved and they were going to go to trial.
All right, Roger, well, as always, we're out of time, but you had, end of the school year, and I'm sure your summer schedule is a very busy one as well.
This is where things start to heat up for me, all the way from here to Christmas. I just finished teaching 8 credit hours this spring at 2 different universities, at K-State and at the law school at Washburn. And the final exams in both of those courses right now are this week. The law students are facing a 36-page final exam, 210 possible points, so we'll see how they do on that. But I want to make sure they're ready to be out in those rural areas to represent farmers and ranchers quite well. That's what the goal is. And then one of my undergraduate students is actually starting this week at Creighton Law School, and he's going to join his father's firm in the northeastern sandhills of Nebraska, which I'm really happy for that. We got another student that's going to end up in a rural area. And I think our rural law program, we have about 30 this summer, Greg, that are working externships across the state of Kansas in rural areas. So we're really pleased with that. But yes, my travel schedule heats up. I've got Quincy, Illinois next week. I've got Santa Fe, New Mexico coming up. That's a 2-day tax seminar. Another one of those, my national one's going to be in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in August. And then places all across the country in between from here until basically just a handful of days before Christmas.
Well, so much of what we talked about with looking at the rural areas, having those externships there, and eventually getting placed out there, it sounds like the work that's been done has been paying off, too.
We're getting some good momentum going. I feel pretty good about that.
All right. Sounds good. Roger, as always, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
That is Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he has been our guest on the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW.